Hi, I'm Sherry from Whole Circle Studio and welcome to week 3 of the Butterfly Bunch Quilt Along. Last week we pieced together all of our paper sections for our butterflies, and this week I'm going to show you how to put them all together and make a beautiful butterfly. So first thing you'll want to do is get one set of all of your parts together, your A, B, C, D, E, and F, and you want to lay it out as shown in diagram 2 of your butterfly bunch pattern. So I have mine laid out here, as you can see, just like the diagram. And we're going to follow the arrows and sew together A to B and then to C, and then D and E, and once those are together, to F. So let me show you some tips for doing that. But before we get to that, I just wanted to remind you that when we're paper piecing, we're actually primarily working by looking at the back. Remember that eventually we're going to flip it over. For this pattern, it doesn't matter too much because everything is symmetrical, but for other paper piecing patterns that might come into play, especially with picking out select colors. So as an example, here I'm working in the reverse. I already have one piece together, which I'm going to show you how to do, but my A is over here. Just remember in the final block, it's over here. When I flip it, it's going to be on this side. So as I mentioned, just keep that in mind for future paper piecing patterns. But first, let me show you how to put all these together. So you're going to follow the arrows just as it is in diagram 2 of the pattern. So we're going to first start by connecting A to B. So let me show you some tips of how I like to keep everything lined up. You could very easily put them fabric sized together and kind of align the raw edges and sew right along that line. But I find sometimes the alignments are a little bit off. So what I like to is use positioning pins, which is essentially just a very sharp pin. And I like to use thin, sharp pins for these. I have a link in the blog post to which ones I prefer. And in this pattern specifically, I put little dots for critical alignment parts. So what I'll do is take my pin and stick it through. We'll start with this one. I like to usually start in the middle. Stick it through this point. And then I'm going to find the other point on the other side, which right now you might have to go to one that's not sewn, but I know that that dot is right here. It's just there's a lot of sewing. So sometimes it takes a few tries to get it through. And I'll just keep going until the 2 points align. Or if I have a critical alignment, sometimes these aren't quite sharp. If I didn't press really well, I'll just poke it through exactly where I want it to align and push that through. And I'm going to go through any other critical alignments that I want to match up. So this point to that point. And like I said, sometimes it takes a couple of tries. And then I'm going to go through and do this end point. Again, you don't have to do this, and you also want to make sure it's a straight pin. The one I just had was a little bit bent. You don't have to do this, but if you really want crisp alignments, this is a good way to do that for either paper piecing or just traditional piecing when you're matching up seams. And then sometimes for really long ones, I'll just kind of align it. And I'll do one sort of in the middle, even though there's not a dot for me to line. A line, I should say. And that's pretty close. I could adjust it a little bit if I want to. Make sure you're going straight down and not at an angle. And that's aligned. So once those positioning points are in, I'll then pin the 2 pieces together and take out these positioning pins. Really important, because you don't want that positioning pin that's straight down to get caught up in your sewing machine. Take it from someone who has done that and forgotten to take out positioning pins. Not a good thing. And so I'll just go along. So if that's pushed all the way through, I know that's aligned. And then I'll push these together, take out my positioning pin, and I'll align these. And take out the positioning pin. So now everything is sort of nice and flat. So what I'll do now is I'm going to sew right along that line. And I like to go edge to edge past where the line is right to the edge, straight along. You're still going to use your 1.5 setting as a stitch length because you want a really, really tight stitch again so we can get this paper off later. One other thing that I like to do is this seam, because there's a lot of bulk, I like to press it, some of them press open or press to the side. I'm sorry, for this specific one, we're going to press to the side, but others we're going to press open. I like to match my thread. So I have 2 corresponding threads, and that way if you do have to press something open, you're just using white, especially on a light color thread with a dark fabric, you're going to see that thread through, which isn't always a big deal, but if you want to really have everything matching, start with matching threads. So once you sew right along that line, you're then going to have, it's going to look like this. So you can see, again, I started right at the end. Again, I like to back stitch 1 or 2 stitches at the beginning and at the end. And then you're going to open it up. And this I already pre-pressed. What I'll typically do is finger press on the paper. For this pattern, I like to press away from the middle pieces, sort of the thinner pieces. So this goes towards the A. And this is all outlined in the pattern. I'll finger press on the paper side, flip it over, and then give a hot press with my iron on this side. So once A and B are together, I'll put it back in position. Again, this is the key with paper piecing, is keeping everything organized. And then I know from my diagram too that once A and B are together, I do the same thing that I just did and use the positioning pins to align B and C and put that together. You're going to do the same thing for the lower part of the butterfly. And then once that's all set, you're going to have 2 halves. The lower butterfly, which is our ABC, and our lower butterfly, so our upper butterfly is ABC, lower butterfly is DEF. Again, right sides together. Again, making sure that everything, I just flip that over, I want to make sure those go together, so I'm just going to flip this underneath so that they're correct sides together. And for this pattern, again, I have some dots for some critical alignment, so I have 2 dots here, and then the 2 dots here. So use your positioning pins to align those, the ends, sew along that line. And then for this seam, because these are pretty bulky, these seams, once it's done, I like to press open. And that's where you may want matching thread. So for here, and sometimes what I'll do is if I'm being really picky about matching things and seeing threads, I'll pick an orange thread here. And so from here to here with orange, and then my yellow thread from here to here. Again, for seams open, you may see that thread, even with that 1.5 stitch length, especially with that because there'll be a lot of stitches. So once that's set, you can see this, I already pressed open. Again, never put the hot iron on the paper side, finger press on this side, and then you have a beautiful butterfly. So this week, get at least maybe 1 butterfly assembled. If you get all 4 assembled, next week we'll start talking about the next step of getting all the butterflies together. I'll also show you some of my tips for removing paper. Leave all the paper on for this point. We'll get a border on, and then we'll go from there. I hope you are having a good time making your butterflies, and I can't wait to see all of them and all the different color variations. Let's make something awesome.